So data types, you have to understand those before you create your objects. We're now ready to create our objects. Here's our table we looked at earlier already, collection of rows and columns. We have our employee ID. Maybe that ID has a tiny int or an int data type. Last name is a varchar. First name is a varchar. Department might be a varchar with different links. Maybe we have a varchar 30 for last name, varchar 20 for the first name, department of varchar 25. We define that when we create these. And the employee ID, we decide, hey, are we going to go above a certain number? If we are, we need to decide if it's a tiny int or an int, or any of the other types that will hold a numeric value for us. Now, in addition to tables, which we're going to use the most often, we have what's called a view. A view is a virtual table, and it consists of columns from either one table or multiple tables that we've pulled in. And we're going to see how one of these are created. A view is not really an object that's stored inside of the database. It's more of a query. So when I go out to use a view, it's actually going to go out and generate that information on demand. So it's not going to populate the content in the view when I create it. It's going to take the select statement, we'll say, and it's going to use that to populate and display the information that I'm looking for when I'm trying to create a view here. And here's some examples of some system views that are provided by Microsoft that are part of the SQL Server world. Stored procedures. These are just a group of transact SQL statements that have been compiled and saved so they can be used multiple times. So I may go in and run the same command multiple times. If I'm doing so, what may be easier is to create a stored procedure that I can reuse. And every time I want to perform a certain task, and in this case here we're looking at the number of items in inventory, going back to talking about what we talked about earlier in a grocery store, for instance. I want to find out how many items are on hand. Well, I can write a store procedure, and instead of having the store procedure hold not being flexible enough to be able to be run against multiple products, I can actually have parameters passed in. So I can supply a parameter to go look for strawberries in the produce department by supplying parameters. The next time I can run it and have it to go look for steaks in the meat department. So I can create a stored procedure that can be run multiple times over and over again. It actually gets compiled, which means it's going to run a little bit faster, be a little bit more efficient. And we can pass parameters to it so I can run it and reuse it multiple times and be able to get results back based on the parameters that I passed into it. So this is just a brief little example of how we use that and to pass parameters into a stored procedure. We can create UDFs or user-defined functions. These are routines that also can take parameters. It completes a specific operation and returns the result of that operation. And there's a few different types, and we'll see these as a couple of these at least we'll see as we're going through some of our demonstration between this module and the next module. But we have a scalar function, which is going to return a single value. So we're going to see, for instance, I want to know the average cost of something. So it can return that information to me. We have a table value. It returns a table data type. We're not going to see that one. I'm just listing a few things out here. And we have system functions, which are functions that are provided by SQL Server in this case here. And we can use those in any of our statements that we're writing, for instance. So we can use that pretty much anywhere we want to return any system type information. So a few different types of functions that we have available to us. And pretty much for this class, we're going to just focus on the scalar function and what kind of information can be returned with that here. As I introduced the stored procedures and the functions, they sounded similar, but here's an example of the differences. In order for me to execute a stored procedure, I use the execute or exec statement. I can't use join stored procedures. I can't join multiple procedures together. I can't use a stored procedure for modifying SQL Server, a configuration of it. And I can't use statements such as a get date in a stored procedure. Now, user-defined functions allows me to perform some of these tasks. I can call from within another SQL statement. So I can call a function from within another SQL statement. I can have multiple UDFs working with each other. It cannot be used for SQL Server configuration. Stored procedures can. The user-defined functions cannot. And if there's a problem with the user-defined function, it's going to stop the function and it's going to no longer continue on. Where a stored procedure, depending on what kind of error checking you've done, will continue to perform. So just a few high-level differences between stored procedures and user-defined functions as you're creating these different objects. Now, one of the things that we often do as we create objects is we have to have a naming convention. Now, there's a couple of the common ones are listed here. The Pascal case is where we use the first letter of the identifier and the first letter of every subsequent concatenated word is capitalized. So, for instance, you see employee table. The E in employee and the T in the table is capitalized. Personally, this is my preference. And I use Pascal case, and you're going to see with the scripts and some of the content that I'm going to be showing you in this module, the next module, I'm totally about Pascal case. Camel case, as you can see, the difference is, with the exception of the first word in the descriptor, the identifier, the first word is lowercase, and then every other word, every concatenated word is now is capitalized. So the first letter is capitalized. So whatever your choice is, whatever your preference is, mine, as I've shared a couple times already, is Pascal case. But whatever you're going to use, be consistent. So when you're starting to rename your objects, if you decide to use Pascal case or Camel case, use the same naming convention for everything that you're doing, so you don't get confused as to why you used it one place and something different in another place. And try to keep that as a standard within your organization, so you know you've got that consistency when you're creating these objects that we're going to be creating here. Okay. We're going to go in and create a database. There's a couple ways we can do this. We're going to show you both ways. We can do it inside of SQL Server Management Studio. We're going to jump over there. And we can also do this inside using a Transact SQL statement. We'll show you how both of these work for us here. So let me jump out and go into my...
This is pretty exciting. This is our first actual database.
Yeah,
we've only seen pictures of databases so far.
Yeah, and the pictures weren't that...
Well, the quick one you showed us, but we didn't actually...
It wasn't that cool. Yeah. Well, a database can be created very easily. I mean, it's kind of like I showed you. This statement here is probably being the easiest statement you can write. Select asterisk from production.product. That's a pretty straightforward statement.
But somebody had to do the creation of the database, and then they had to create production.product.
Yeah, that's that whole schema with all the...
That's the table. So they went through their spreadsheet and figured out what tables they needed. Yeah. And once we create our database, we're going to go and we're going to talk about creating a table where we're going to use all that stuff you just taught us about the data types.
Perfect.
And then this is actually the foreshadow to the next module, where we'll learn all sorts of different ways to write queries that get the data out of the database.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and that's the big thing. I mean, all the upfront work that we're spending time on, that you talk about, Pete, is really, it's not. It's kind of, it seems like there's a lot of upfront work in getting the tables and getting the foreign keys and the primary key constraints. But once that's all done, the big bang for the buck we're going to see in the next module, you're going to see how much easier it is and more efficient it is for us to be able to retrieve that content and slice and dice it in several different ways. So let's create the easiest way to create a database is go in here to the SQL Server Management Studio, and over here where it says databases, I'm going to right click and do new database, and here's a name right here. So I'm going to call this class demo DB. Now, quite honestly, I can right here find my mouse, come back mouse. There it is. Must have been off in the real. I think, was it over on your screen? I don't know. Lost it on my screen. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is how simple it is from inside of here. Now, there's options that we can change here, but I want to show you how easy it is to create a database. All I did is give it a name. All right. I'm going to click OK. And if you look over on the left-hand side here, we've got a new item here called Class Demo Database. That's how easy it is to create a database in here.
Woohoo!
Now, was it efficient? Did I do everything I should have done to make it as optimal as possible? Absolutely not. But I wanted to show you, if you want to do something today, say, hey, create my first database, open up SQL Server Management Studio if you have access to it. Remember, SQL Server Express is out there if you want to dabble with this. And then go in, right-click database, give it a name, click OK, and go out and have a baby, because you just created your first database and you're into the SQL Server world at that point. Again, a lot more we can do. To make it a little bit more complex, let's say we like to type. We want to practice our typing skills. I'm going to actually go out. I created a script file the other day, and I'm going to open up a script file. I'm going to talk a little bit more about scripts. So I'm going to open this up here.
We should talk, while you're doing that, you've referenced this thing called T-SQL. Can you just explain what you mean by T-SQL?
T-SQL is like in golf when you tee up. It's not like that at all. Okay, so I do know that much. But T-SQL is Transact SQL. It's Microsoft's flavor. We talked a little bit about ISO standards just a couple of minutes ago. So whether you're using SQL Server or using your MySQL, or if you're using Access, they all have a different flavor of statements that you're going to use. They're all very similar. We talked about that. Most all of them will adhere to the ISO standard. I know it sounds redundant, but saying ISO sounds weird by itself. So most will all adhere to that, and then most of them will have variations. They might, for instance, we had the cast, but we have a variation of which was convert, so we can have variations of the different commands. But T-SQL is Transact SQL, and that's Microsoft SQL Server's flavor of issuing or writing commands, as we're going to do. So even doing that select statement, that was a T-SQL statement. Creating a database, as we're about to do, is a T-SQL. So anything that we do, pretty much anything that we do, even inside of a stored procedure, or inside of a function, it's ways for us to query or manage or manipulate data inside of SQL Server. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's better. Because you're about to go ahead and open that file, which we're going to use for the demo, which is full of these T-SQL commands.
So the cool thing is, what I've done so you guys can see, trust me, Pete was watching me type yesterday, he fell asleep. Because I'm fat fingering stuff, I don't have the proper quotes, or I forget a quote, or I got too many quotes, or it was just always making mistakes. So what I've done to avoid the pain for you folks is I set up these queries, and I'll show you how to execute them, and I'll explain what every one of them means as we're going through them. So I just showed you an easy way, as easy as it gets, to create a database. I go into SQL Server Management Studio, I right-click on databases, I do new, I add a name, I click OK, done. I create a new database. Now, if you like to practice your typing skills, here's another way we could have done that. All right, a little bit more complex, but let's walk through this. This is a Transact SQL statement. This is going to create a database called sales, and then we're going to give it a logical name called sales_dat. And whenever you create a database, it gets two files that are created on the drive, and I'm happy to store these on the C drive, and my sales.mdf file is created, and that's going to store my content. And the size of that's going to be 10. The max I'll let that size of that file go is 50. And if it needs to stop and grow, it's going to grow in, I call baby increments, 5 megabytes at a time. So what this does for me, when I create this file that's going to store my content, the size is going to be 10. If I'm at 9 and I try to add a 4 megabyte file, I'm short 9 and 4, 30, I'm short 3 megabytes. So what this does, I've got auto growth on, so it's going to grow, it's going to stop, it's going to grow by 5 megabytes. Now it'll let me to continue to add that content. The bad thing is it's going to keep doing that every time I need to add content. So different story, but we can actually change these and set these to be a little bit more appropriate values.
But I think specifically, you showed us you could right-click and do Create Database, and you alluded to a whole page full of options that I could have set.
Yeah.
In your script is using the Create T-SQL statement to create a database.
That's exactly right.
And it's specifying a variety of those options in code. So you can do it with the graphical user interface.
Perfect.
Or you can do it with code. It's just a different way to create the database.
Yeah, I just showed you the easiest way to create the database was right-click, bam, you create the database. You're exactly right. If I went in there and looked at options and I looked at files, I could change that so the size equal 10, the max size equal 50. I could specify the file name, the file location. I just wanted to show you, just to give you the opportunity to create a database. That was the quickest, easiest way to do that.
And I think this is an opportunity to call out. We've got a bunch of training about SQL Server specifically, and in the database administration course that we have, you can actually learn all about the different ways to create a database for optimal growth and minimal size and those sorts of things that you're calling out in your script here.
Yeah, optimizing databases. Again, this is the DB fundamentals, so trying not to go too deep. Hope Pete's keeping me on track with that, because I start digging deep, and next thing I know, I'm like...
Well, the concept is sound, right? In Access, we can create a database by doing file new, because it's more of it's a desktop. It's not a database server product like SQL Server. And in MySQL, there's a way to create a new database. And they all have these kinds of parameters about how big should it be, and what's the file going to be on disk, and those sorts of things. But the concept is, it's a simple create statement. SQL Server uses this query language called T-SQL that you can use create, or you can just right-click in SQL Server Management Studio to create the database.
Yeah, so it depends. If you get paid by the hour, you'll want to learn how to type these in. If you get paid, if it's just getting the work done.
But
then
show us
it's
that it
SQL.
runs now. I don't.
You don't believe
I
me?
don't. I want to see it happen because you did one with the graphical user face.
Right. So this is
I also want to see you've got a whole long page of scripts there. I can't wait to see what we're
I got
actually
some
going to
other
do.
cool stuff in here. This one's a small one compared to the next module. So this is the MDF, the data file. It also uses something called an LDF file, which is a transaction log. Again, all of the most most relational databases uses it's called a transaction log style. So every data modification, not retrieval, but modification, is stored in a transaction log file. In this case, here in SQL Server, stored in a transaction log file, and then it's written. Eventually, it's written into the MDF file. So it's just a temporary location. It's strictly there. It's primarily there, I'll say, for disaster recovery or data recovery. So we need to supply that. It built that for me when I used the right-click new database. It promise you if I go out there that content is stored there. I didn't get to specify where it went like I can here though. That was stuck in the default location, which is way deep in the C drive somewhere. I've created this to show you that you can specify where you want these files and what the name of these files when you're using this command. All right, let's see if this thing works. Now the cool thing is, it's back in the query analyzer or query window here. It will only execute content that you highlighted. So you notice I've got some commands. I don't want these to run down here yet. So I'm going to highlight this content up here, and I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to choose the execute up here, or I can press F5. So either way will work. And it's going to go out. It's going to execute this command. Hopefully, it will execute this command and create a new database called sales. All right. I've got it highlighted. I'm going to press F5 on my keyboard. It comes back and tells me command completed successfully. Well, if I go over to databases, what's it called? Sales. I don't see it here. So let me right click and do a refresh. And here's my new database called sales. And if I want to look at the properties of this real quick, and it'll just be real quick, you'll see, just go with files for instance. Here's my 10 and my 5, and here's my auto growth. And again, as Pete pointed out, I could have done all this when I was doing the window, when I was going through the graphical user interface. I chose to show you just the quickest way for you to create a database, and that was the quickest way. And this is another way, if you get paid by the hour, to create a database is to write scripts. The cool thing about scripts too, I'm making fun about getting paid for it, but scripts are beautiful in the sense they're reusable. So this is another reason you may want to script some of this content here. All right, let's see if I can get this window back. I don't want this window so big here. Let's get this back down a little bit. Okay, so we have a database out there. Now, remember I talked about the use option. I need to add a table to that. So the idea that we talked about just previously was, hey, when you create a new table, you need to understand the type of content you're going to store in there. So this table I'm going to create is called products1. We're going to have a field in there called product ID. We're using an integer value. All right, so I can store whole numbers in there. We're going to have product name varchar 20. We're going to have unit price using the money data type, and we're going to have product description using varchar 50. Remember, if it's char, if that was a char 50 versus a varchar, even if it uses 10 characters, it's going to allocate space for 50. So it's a fixed length, where a varchar says only allocate whatever you need to store the content. So if this product description is only 10 characters, it's going to have storage for 10, not 50. So there's not a lot, so it won't be as much unused space. So what we're going to tell it to do is use the database we just created called sales and create this new table in there. So if I go over under tables over to the left right now, you're going to see system tables, file tables. Those were just tables loaded by default. Let's create our new table here. So I'm going to go in now. I'm going to highlight this because I can just highlight what I want. And I'm going to execute this. And command completed successfully. Let's do a double check over here. Let's go back to sales and do a refresh. And go back to our tables. And you'll see we have our new table here called dbo.products1. And if I expand on that, you'll see our columns. And you'll see the 4 columns that we specified here were also created there. So easy enough now. We've created a database. We've talked about what data types are. We've decided the type of content that we're going to store in that database. We're going to store in this products1 table. And we've created a table now that will allow us to be able to enter content in there. We're going to talk about doing that a little bit later on, though. Remember, right now we're talking about a data definition or DDL statements. We're talking about creating objects and modifying objects. So it created a database. We added a table to that database. Something else we can do, and so notice when I created a database, I used the create statement. If I created a table, I used the create statement. I create a view, I create a store procedure. Whatever I create, if it's an object inside a SQL Server, I use the create statement. So it makes it simple for me. If I want to change the database, or I want to change a table, or a procedure, or a view, I use the alter statement. So I create a database called sales. I want to change that database name to sales forecast. By the way, that little green line that says right there what I'm doing, that's a comment. So anything that's got dash dash and it highlights it. Notice the color coding, by the way. The blue is saying these are actual statements. These are the fields. These are values that are supplied by Microsoft SQL Server. The dash says this, ignore everything to the right of that. It's just a comment. So you can document. People always document late, but they always document what's going on here. So this is a reminder to me, oh, I want to change a database. I can highlight it and try to execute it. Nothing's going to execute because it's a comment. But we're going to alter the database called sales. We're going to call it sales forecast. We'll hit execute up here. All right, the database name sales forecast has been set. Let's refresh. And we'll go over here. We'll see now our database now is sales forecast. So now we've changed the name of our database. Now, if I want to delete the database, I've been asking Microsoft for years to change this from drop to toast. I like the command toast. I want to toast a database. I want to toast a table. It's still not toast. You can write a store procedure to do that, though. You can write a store procedure to do the same thing as drop, and I've done that before. But we won't go there. It's bad. It's just going to stay with standard stuff here. So I want to drop the database, or I want to drop a table, or I want to drop a view. I use this statement right here. Toast the database. We're going to highlight this. So remember over here we got sales forecast. We're going to execute. Ooh, cannot drop because it's currently in use. I must be connected to it somewhere. Modify name, toast the database. Let's see here. I know another way we can do this. Come over to the right. And I can do a delete here. Now what's happened is I have a connection to it. So because that failed, I'm going to come over here. There's a connection to it. So my guess is if I do OK here, it's in progress. It's already taken too long. It's going to come back. It should give me pretty much the same type of deal. It can't do it. And they're going to take this long, or else I wouldn't have done this piece. But it's going to come back, but I'm almost positive it's because there's a connection established to it. And so what I'm going to do, okay, now it fails. Drop failed for database. Let me do this. Let me click this guy right here. Close connection. And do an OK. Hopefully that will do it.
You know why they don't call it toast, by the way?
Why?
It's because toasting the database would make it more delicious.
Oh, that's true. Usually it's
Right.
fatness. That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. All right, we got rid of our database. If you look over here, we got rid of it here. I couldn't do the drop database. There are parameters you can supply with that to drop existing connections, so we could have done it that way. But because I had established a connection to it, it wouldn't let me drop that database.
So it looks like a lot of the things that you can do with the user interface in SQL Server, you can also just write script to do.
And scripts, we're going to talk a little bit more about scripts. This is kind of an introduction to them because I want to bring these in so you didn't have to watch me fat finger everything. But scripts are really powerful, especially if there's redundant tasks that you're performing. And let's say I wanted to hand this off to Pete so he can go out and create the same database. I just send him this script. He can pop it into his SQL Server Management Studio. He runs it. He's got the same database with the tables and the alteration of it if he wants to. So it's easy enough to redo information or tasks that we're performing here. All right, let's jump back out into our slide deck. That's not where I wanted to be here. I need to drop this guy this way. No? Yes? Or am I going too far here? Oh, I'm coming way out. I know what I need to do. I'm coming out of my connection. I need to minimize that. Here we go. And let's go back into our PowerPoints, which somehow got closed. We're in what, Module 3?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, come on now, work with me. There we are. All right, so that's creating a database class demo DB. That's the one we created using the interface. And the one that we created, that we're going to create, we also created one using a script. And we deleted that one after we had added a table to it.